As I mentioned to the kids, I do understand bad hands and bad knees. They tend to come with age. And those who have endured a lot will often end up with hands and knees that are not functioning at 100%. I love to walk, but if I have to stand for long periods, I find that the joints around my knees will sometimes buckle a bit. So I'm walking along and suddenly they'll just drop out from underneath me. So I go with my amazing bamboo leg, and things always tend to work out with that. I have absolutely no complaints about it, about walking, or I'm getting along just fine, thank you so much. It's even a great discussion starter, especially with children. And once that I explained to them that it is a magic cane which allows me to engage my invisibility superpower, well, that's a whole other story, for a different time, maybe over lunch. But my point here is that weakness can be turned into funness. Sometimes, though, tired hands shake and knees buckle from fear, which is hard to turn into fun. And I'm thinking that's what the prophet is driving at when he says in Isaiah 35:3, "So strengthen those with weary and weak hands, steady those with rubbery knees, there is reason to go on." Given the desperate situation, the people of God are tempted to give up and to give in. To just go with the comfortable flow of society, right? I don't know if you ever feel that, so frustrated and so overwhelmed with the way that things are going that you just want to drop out of this godly resistance army and become either a violent resistor or a self-absorbed hedonist that blends in with the crowd. The prophet Isaiah has been delivering messages from God to the people of Judah in the 8th century BC, although details are a little bit fuzzy, so it's kind of hard to peg exactly how the Isaiah timeline flows. But the messages are not at all hard to grasp. Here's the message of Isaiah: doom, 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 despair, and then with a slice of hope slivered in there, and then there's doom, doom, despair. And the people of God, and in particular the kings and the wealthy, had screwed up, and that was causing regional instability around them, and eventually the nation of Judah would be carted off into this foreign exile. Yet here in chapter 35, is that slice, that sliver of hope that's wedged into the sandwich of doom. To encourage people to resist getting swallowed by this great sense of despair. To resist getting blanketed by this dark cloud that was starting to drop over and hang over the people. Something good is going to happen. So, those with weary and weak hands, strengthen them. Steady those with the rubbery knees. There is actually reason to go on. And it's this message of hope dropped into all this despair that I want us to focus on this morning. Well, let's look at the text again, starting with my paraphrase version of it. Let me stand here and use my invisibility cane. The once barren desert land will be transformed into party land. The wilderness will sing and dance with joy. The whole place will be verdant and as colorful as blooming crocus. The desert will burst into bloom and joyous song. The glory of Lebanon and the splendor of both Carmel and Sharon will be packed into one place. The desert land will host an incredible display of the Lord's glory, the splendor of our God. So strengthen those with weary and weak hands. Steady those with rubbery knees. There is reason to go on. Say to those who are inclined to panic, stop fretting. You'll survive. Be strong. Fear not. Your God is on his way to make things right, and it won't be a pretty sight for those who are giving you grief. God is coming to save the day. He will be your avenging Savior. Then the blind eyes will see and the deaf ears will hear. And if that were not enough drama, the lame will be leaping about like deer, and the speechless will be singing Handel's Messiah, obviously part 1, scene 5, novella 19, which quotes Isaiah 35, 5 through 6. I had to throw that in there, I couldn't resist. Water will bubble up in the desert, and there will be life-giving streams in the wilderness. Verse 7, the scorching sand will become an oasis pool, and the hardened ground will become a fountain. The jackal savanna will be swallowed by wetland reeds and rushes. There will even be a highway out there. It will be called Holy Road because it will be wholly dedicated to God. And it will be for the exclusive use of his people, and they will be the only ones out there walking on it. This road will be so safe that even the directionally challenged won't get lost on it. And the road will be a predator-free zone. No lions or other dangerous animals will be out there. Yep, Holy Road will be a smooth and safe traveling experience reserved for those whom the Lord has redeemed. And the ransomed ones will travel it as they return to Zion, singing along the way with everlasting joy as their head coverings. Happiness and joy will overtake them along the way, and all the misery and suffering will flee back to where they come from. Sounds like a great place, doesn't it? Perhaps the thought of it will be great enough to steady the hands and knees of those who are in despair. Well, I want to make 5 observations about Isaiah 35, the text itself this morning, and then to challenge you to receive it as a strategy for dealing with your own weary hands and your own rubbery knees. Text observation number 1. You ready? We're reading a poem. Isaiah 35 is a poem. We're reading a poem. If this were a classroom lecture, I'd explain that this is a chiastic poem with inverse parallelism. But we're not in a classroom lecture, so we won't get all technical. But I will tell you that this chapter is poetically structured. And as you know, poetry is not intended to be taken too literally. It is designed to conjure an image, an impression, to make an impression upon you, to engage the emotions, to engage the imagination at a deep, deep level. Now, I'm not saying that it's untrue. Just that with poetry, you do not read it like you would read prose. You do not read it like you would read a newspaper. You do not read it like you would read a spreadsheet. And in that part of the world, poetry is still the highest form of communication. If something's really important, if you really want to get to people, you are going to put it in poetic form. If something is really important, you will frame that message in a poem, or you insert bits of poetry into other genres. So by speaking this way, the prophet is trying to get his audience to engage with his message at a very deep emotional level. He wants them to actually feel the hope that he is talking about here. Text observation number 2. This prophecy sounds a lot like a Back to Eden story. This prophecy sounds like a lot like a Back to Eden story. Verse 1, the once barren desert land will be transformed into party land. The wilderness is going to sing and dance with joy, and the whole place will be verdant, that is green, and as colorful as blooming crocus. The desert will burst into bloom and joyous song. Water will bubble up in the desert, verse 6, and there will be life-giving streams in the wilderness. The scorching sand, which we know absolutely nothing about in Phoenix. The scorching sand will become an oasis pool, and the hardened ground will become a fountain. The jackal savanna will be swallowed by wetland reeds and rushes. And the glory of Lebanon and the splendor of both Carmel and Sharon will all be packed into this one place. And the desert land will host an incredible display of the Lord's glory, the splendor of our God. The Garden of Eden story from Genesis 2, Genesis 2 is the primary story of the Bible in terms of the overall flow of all the other stories. It gets things going in a certain direction. It's a story of the perfect place, lush with rivers, lush with vegetation, beauty surrounded by, on the outside, all this wilderness, but in the midst of it, you've got this perfect garden. And it stands in contrast in terms of the overall flow of the story with the second most formative story, mini story in the Testament, which would be the Exodus, where the people of God struggle to survive in the wilderness. The hopeful prophecy is about an Exodus return to paradise, to the new Garden of Eden. Not necessarily literally, it's poetry, but of an existence that is comparably situated. That is, it's intended to instill hope in people, in you and in me. Text observation number 3. The Savior leads his people home. The Savior leads his people home. Verse 4, God is coming to save the day. He will be your avenging Savior. Verse 8, there will even be a highway out there. It will be called Holy Road because it will be wholly dedicated to God. It will be for the exclusive use of his people, and they will be the only ones out there walking on it. This road will be so safe that even the directionally challenged, and you know who you are, won't get lost on it. And the road will be a predator-free zone. No lions or Gila monsters or rattlesnakes or other dangerous animals will be there. Yet the Holy Road will be a smooth, safe traveling experience reserved for you or for those from whom the Lord has redeemed. And the ransomed ones will travel it as they return to Zion. So then this begs the question, what is this return that he's talking about? Is it a return to Judah after the Babylonian exile? Perhaps, partially. But when the Jews returned to Judah after their 70-year exile, they didn't actually return to some kind of a garden paradise, did they? The homeland was in total and absolute ruin, and they had to protect themselves from raids while they were reconstructing. It was not a safe place. Well, some might then argue that this is an image for seeing modern Judaism or modern Zionism. The return of the Jews to the land of Israel in the 20th century. Again, perhaps there is some overlap, and you don't want to totally rule that out. But again, it has not been a smooth and clear pathway for the modern Jews to return to the land. The modern story is about unending warfare and terrorism. It's about tit-for-tat fighting. Isaiah 35 doesn't sound at all like that. And while there are partial fulfillments along the way, Isaiah 35 seems to be this poetic picture of a more complete return. Kind of a new heaven and a new earth, such as what is described in Revelation 21 and Revelation 22. Revelation 21 verses 1 through 2 says, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the former heaven and the former earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming out of heaven from God." And then Revelation 21 verse 6, "To the thirsty I will freely give water from the life-giving spring." Do you see the parallel between the imagery? Revelation 22, 1 through 3. "Then the angel showed me the river of life-giving water, shining like crystal, flowing from the throne of God and the Lamb, through the middle of the city's main street. On each side of the river is the tree of life, which produces 12 crops of fruit, bearing its fruit each month. And the tree's leaves are there for the healing of the nations. There will no longer be any curse. So it's garden imagery in the middle of the city at that point. They kind of come together. And as I'm looking at Isaiah 35, I'm thinking that the prophet is seeing something in the very distant future rather than something more immediate. Text observation number 4. The renewed homeland will be characterized by healing and joy. The renewed homeland will be characterized by healing and joy. Verse 1 again, the once barren desert land will be transformed into party land. Woohoo! The wilderness, of all things, will sing and dance with joy. The desert will burst into bloom and joyous song. Verse 5, then the blind eyes will see and the deaf ears will hear. And if that were not enough drama, the lame will be leaping about like deer, and the speechless will be singing. The transformed and restored homeland, the garden, will be characterized by a kind of health and joy. And we can't help but notice that Jesus was inaugurating this new era of health and joy with the healings that he did, right? And then which the apostles performed as a continuation of this restoration project that Jesus started. So, for example, in Luke 7, and also in the Matthew passage that Jack read for us, the imprisoned John the Baptist sends some of his followers to Jesus, asking him if he were indeed the one. And so Luke 7:22 says, then he replied to John's disciples, go report to John what you have seen and heard. Those who are blind are able to see. Those who were crippled now walk. Those who were deaf now hear. And those who were dead are raised up. And the good news is preached to the poor. Then another passage along these lines in Acts 3:8. Peter and John are walking along. They become involved in the healing of a lame man. And it said that the man entered the temple with them. And what does it say about him? He went walking and leaping and praising God. Is this not at least an indirect reference to Isaiah 35:6? The lame will be leaping about like deer. So could it be that Isaiah is foreseeing the era that is initiated by the coming of Jesus, the kingdom of God? Text observation number 5. The Savior is an avenger. The Savior is an avenger. Verse 4, God is coming to save the day. He will be your avenging Savior. And avenge is the English power word of the week. It means to make things right. It means to complete justice. Now, we don't normally talk about Jesus the Savior as an avenger, but that idea is definitely included in his job description. Jesus is all about justice. He's all about making things right. He's all about establishing righteousness in our lives as individuals and in our social, broader, connected life. And that at times involves exercising vengeance. Of course, vengeance is not necessarily what we might think vengeance is. We have this very shallow sense of an avenger with kind of this grim reaper guy walking around and lopping off heads of bad guys with his sword. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vineyard where the grapes of wrath are stored. He hath loosed the fateful lightning of his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on. But God's sense of justice is actually full of surprises. In the Old Testament, God sets limits on retaliation. So, for example, in Exodus 21:23, if there is further injury, we read, then you will give a life for a life, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, and a hand for a hand, and a foot for a foot, and a burn for a burn, and a bruise for a bruise, and a wound for a wound. This is called lex talionis, and it basically means that punishment must correspond in kind and degree with the injury. Basically, it's setting limits to justice. In other words, you can't take more than an eye for an eye. You can't take more than a tooth for a tooth. So along comes Jesus, and he fine-tunes that notion of justice when he adds in Matthew 5, and he says, you have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. However, but I say to you that you must not oppose those who want to hurt you. If people slap you on your right cheek, you must turn the left cheek to them as well. And when they wish to haul you to the court and take your shirt, let them have the coat too. And when they force you to go 1 mile, go with them 2. Give to those who ask, and don't refuse those who wish to borrow from you. God seems interested in making things right, but not so much in doing it in a way that it is punishment. Where there is punishment, it is God making things extremely right. The punishment is not the end. The punishment is part of the process. The punishment is not the justice per se. The punishment is a means toward the justice. God's justice is not punitive, it is restorative. Does that make sense? God's justice is not punitive, it's restorative. And that's true with us as individuals. God's not getting back at you. You know, all this tough stuff that you're going through now, it's not God getting back at you. God's justice is not punitive, but it is restorative. He uses those situations to bring us to a point of restoration in our relationship, our walk with Him. And of course, Jesus Himself becomes a part of His justice system. You've got the perfect man absorbing the pain and the sin of this rebellious world and all the people in it, in order to restore us to right relationship with God, right relationship with each other, and right relationship to the creation as a whole. And in this way, Jesus is leading us home. He is leading us out of the painful place. Here's the key point this morning. We are strengthened as we realize that Christ Jesus comes as the avenging Savior to lead us home. We are strengthened as we realize that Christ Jesus comes as the avenging Savior to lead us home. And I know that this has all gotten a little bit kind of on the theoretical level, and maybe it's even drifted into the esoteric, and that is certainly ironic. I mean, poetry is supposed to move our hearts. It uses imagination to introduce transformation into our lives. So hopefully the poetry itself is not lost in the explanation. So now that you have a background, I challenge you to read Isaiah 35 in a new way, and to read it as a strategy for overcoming your weak hands and your rubbery knees. And the fact is, we all at times have weak hands, and we all have rubbery knees. Not all of you are fortunate enough to have a bamboo cane like me, but we all struggle with rubbery knees. And the poem itself, as it points us to Jesus, as we live in it and it lives in us, over time it will make you strong and courageous to face the troubling happenings in our world, and the troubling happenings in our lives, and to do so without despair. So to get us kind of started here, I'm wondering who might be willing to read all or even part of the Isaiah 35 poem for us again. Who's got their reading voice this morning? maybe 1 or 2 verses to start with, and someone can pick up.
I try it. And I use the New Living Translation.
Certainly, go ahead.
Even the wilderness and desert will be glad in those days. The wasteland will rejoice and blossom with spring crocus. Yes, there will be an abundance of flowers and singing and joy. The deserts will become as green as the mountains of Lebanon, as lovely as Mountain Carmel or the plain of Sharon. There the Lord will display this glory, the splendor of our God. With this news, strengthen those who have tired hands, and encourage those who have weak lives. Say to those with faithful hearts, be strong and do not fear, for your God is coming to destroy your enemies. He is coming to save you. Somebody continue 5.
And you can use any version, or if you want to just use the paraphrase that's printed.
Okay, so this is the author as Boydston.
Very good.
Then the blind eyes will see, and the deaf ears will hear. And if that were not enough drawn, the lame will be leaping like deer, and the speechless will be singing. Hannah's Messiah, of course, which quotes Isaiah 35, 5-6. Water will bubble up in the desert, and there will be life-giving streams in the wilderness. The scorching sand will become an oasis pool, and the hardened ground will become a fountain. The jackal savanna will be swallowed by wetland reeds and rushes.
Who wants to go next?
So what verse do we start on now?
8.
8. And a highway will be there. It will be called the way of holiness. It will be for those who walk on that way. The unclean will not journey on it. Wicked fools will not go about on it. No lion will be there, nor any ravenous beast. They will not be found there. But only the redeemed will walk there, and those the Lord has rescued will return. They will enter Zion with singing. Everlasting joy will crown their heads. Gladness and joy will overtake them, and sorrow and sighing will flee away.